The tea shop that opened only at sunset. Chapter 1. The road no map remembered. If you're comfortably settled, perhaps beneath a warm blanket with the lights dimmed, allow yourself to imagine a quiet country road where the evening breeze carries the scent of pine, fresh earth, and distant rain. There is nowhere you need to be tonight. No clocks to watch. No messages to answer. Only a gentle journey toward a place that appears for those who have forgotten how to stop rushing. Few people ever found the road on purpose. Maps ignored it. GPS devices confidently directed travelers somewhere else. Even long-time locals would shake their heads and say they had never heard of such a path, though some secretly remembered dreams of walking beneath ancient maple trees glowing in amber light. The road appeared only during the final moments before sunset. It began where an ordinary gravel lane curved beside a weathered stone bridge. Most afternoons, the bridge crossed nothing more than a narrow stream that reflected the sky like polished glass. Yet, as daylight softened into gold, the air itself seemed to slow. Shadows stretched longer, birds grew quieter, and the world took one deep, peaceful breath. That was when the forgotten road quietly revealed itself. Not with magic that sparkled or thundered. Only with stillness. One autumn evening, a young travel writer named Oliver happened to be driving through the countryside after spending weeks chasing stories that never felt quite complete. His notebook rested on the passenger seat. Every page was filled with beautiful photographs and carefully written observations, yet something was missing. He had visited famous mountains, historic villages, hidden beaches, bustling cities. But every article sounded almost exactly like the last. As the golden sun drifted lower, Oliver sighed and rolled down the window. Cool air entered the car, carrying the fragrance of cedar wood, wildflowers, and something else. Fresh tea. He smiled to himself. Someone must live nearby. Following the gentle scent, he slowed the car. That was when he noticed something impossible. A narrow dirt road curved away from the main highway. He could have sworn it had not been there only moments earlier. Curious by nature, he turned the steering wheel. The tires crunched softly over tiny stones as towering maple trees welcomed him beneath an arch of golden leaves. The farther he drove, the quieter everything became. No traffic. No airplanes. No phone signal. Even the wind seemed to whisper instead of blow. Sunlight filtered through branches like warm honey, painting slow-moving patterns across the road. Oliver reached for his camera several times. Yet every photograph looked strangely ordinary. The peaceful glow disappeared from every picture. Only his own eyes could see it. He laughed quietly. Well, that's different. After another few minutes, he noticed small wooden lanterns hanging from tree branches. Each one had been carefully carved by hand. None were lit. Not yet. Then, almost together, every lantern awakened with a gentle golden flame. Not bright enough to surprise. Only bright enough to welcome. Oliver slowed the car to little more than walking speed. Ahead stood a tiny wooden sign. Its paint had faded long ago. Simple letters read, "Sunset Tea House." No hours. No directions. No advertisements. Just those three peaceful words. The road curved one final time. Then the trees opened. Nestled beside a quiet lake sat the smallest tea shop Oliver had ever seen. Its roof was covered with moss and climbing ivy. Soft smoke drifted lazily from a stone chimney. Flower boxes overflowed with lavender, chamomile, rosemary, and tiny white blossoms dancing gently in the evening air. The windows glowed with warm amber light. Outside, several wooden chairs faced the lake where the setting sun floated upon perfectly calm water. No customers could be seen. No voices. Only silence that somehow felt welcoming instead of lonely. Oliver stepped from his car. The gravel beneath his shoes barely made a sound. He checked his watch. 6:47 p.m. Then he looked toward the sun. It seemed almost unwilling to disappear below the hills, lingering far longer than nature usually allowed. The scent of freshly baked bread drifted through the air, along with cinnamon, honey, orange peel, and tea unlike anything he had ever smelled before. It wasn't one fragrance. It was many, as though every comforting memory had somehow found its way into a single kettle. Before Oliver reached the front door, it slowly opened by itself. A tiny brass bell hanging above the entrance gave a single gentle ring. Inside stood an elderly woman wearing a deep green apron embroidered with delicate golden leaves. Her silver hair was neatly gathered into a loose braid. Her smile carried the warmth of someone greeting an old friend rather than a stranger. She bowed her head ever so slightly. "I've been expecting you." Oliver blinked. "I'm sorry. Have we met before?" The woman smiled, her eyes sparkling kindly. "Not yet." He frowned with polite confusion. "I'm afraid I don't understand." "Most people don't." She stepped aside. "Please come in." The shop was smaller than it appeared from outside. Or perhaps larger. Shelves reached almost to the ceiling, filled with countless glass jars containing tea leaves in every imaginable shade of green, gold, crimson, silver, and blue. Each jar carried no label. Only a tiny painted symbol. A feather. A star. A mountain. A boat. A crescent moon. A falling leaf. Near the fireplace, a black cat slept peacefully without opening its eyes. An old grandfather clock ticked slowly, though its hands never seemed to move. Soft instrumental music floated through the room, though Oliver couldn't discover where it came from. The elderly woman placed a porcelain teacup upon the wooden counter. Steam curled upward like delicate ribbons. "I haven't ordered anything," Oliver said gently. "You will." She smiled. "I already know." For reasons he could not explain, Oliver didn't feel alarmed. Only calm. Calmer than he had felt in years. As though the noise inside his own thoughts had quietly stepped outside to watch the sunset. The woman carefully poured amber-colored tea into the waiting cup. Its surface reflected the fading sunlight like liquid gold. She placed it before him. "Welcome," she whispered. "The tea shop only opens at sunset." Outside, the last rays of daylight settled gently across the quiet lake. And somewhere beyond the windows, the tiny brass bell rang once more, as if another traveler had finally found the road no map remembered. The tea shop that opened only at sunset. Chapter 2. The Bell That Rang at Sunset. The little brass bell above the door settled into silence once more. Its single gentle chime seemed to linger in the warm air long after the sound itself had faded, like ripples spreading across a perfectly still pond. Oliver wrapped both hands around the porcelain teacup. It was pleasantly warm, but not hot enough to rush him. The fragrance rising from the tea was unlike anything he had ever experienced. At first, he noticed honey, then roasted apples. A moment later came fresh mint, followed by the faint scent of cedar after rain. Every breath revealed something new, as though the tea changed with each quiet thought. The elderly woman watched him with a patient smile. "You may drink whenever you're ready." Oliver looked into the cup. "I still don't know what kind of tea this is." She tilted her head ever so slightly. "It has never needed a name." He laughed softly. "Everything has a name. Perhaps." She gently dusted an already spotless shelf. "But names are for those who wish to explain things. Some things simply wish to be experienced." Oliver considered her words before lifting the cup. The first sip was delicate, light, comforting. It wasn't sweet, yet it carried a warmth that reminded him of something he couldn't quite place. He closed his eyes for only a second. Suddenly, he was 8 years old again. Not truly there, but remembering with astonishing clarity. A rainy afternoon. His grandmother humming while preparing tea in a tiny blue kitchen. The windows fogged by steam. Fresh bread cooling on the table. Outside, rain tapped gently against the roof, while inside everything felt safe. He hadn't thought about that afternoon in over 20 years. When he opened his eyes, the memory lingered like sunlight after dawn. The tea shop remained exactly as before. The fire crackled quietly. The old clock continued its slow, steady ticking. The black cat still slept peacefully beside the hearth. Oliver looked at the woman. What was that? She smiled. A happy memory. I haven't remembered it since I was a child. I know. You knew. She nodded. The tea always does. Oliver glanced back at his cup. It's impossible. Most beautiful things are. She spoke so gently that the word impossible sounded almost unnecessary. Before Oliver could ask another question, the bell above the door rang again. This time, a tall man entered carrying a weathered leather backpack. His hiking boots were dusty. His beard carried tiny traces of silver despite his youthful face. He removed his hat with a grateful smile. "Good evening." The woman bowed slightly. "Welcome back, Samuel." Oliver noticed the word. "Back." "So you've been here before?" he asked. Samuel smiled. "I've been fortunate enough to find this place 3 times. Can anyone return?" Samuel chuckled. "No one knows. I searched for it last year. I drove the same roads. I followed every map. I found nothing." He looked around the room with quiet appreciation. "It seems the tea shop decides." The woman simply continued polishing a teapot. She neither agreed nor disagreed. Instead, she prepared another cup. Samuel watched carefully. "I wonder which one today." Without looking up, she answered, "The one you've needed all summer." He laughed. "I suspected as much." She placed a deep emerald-colored tea before him. Its aroma reminded Oliver of mountain forests after fresh rain. Samuel inhaled deeply before taking a careful sip. His shoulders relaxed almost instantly. "I'd forgotten how quiet the world could feel." The woman nodded knowingly. "Many people mistake silence for emptiness." "It isn't. It's where tired hearts finally rest." Oliver wrote the sentence in his notebook, then paused. When he looked back, the words had disappeared. The page was blank. He blinked. He clearly remembered writing them. Confused, he turned several pages. Everything else remained. Only those words had vanished. The woman noticed his puzzled expression. "The notebook keeps facts." She smiled gently. "The tea shop keeps stories." Oliver wasn't sure what that meant. Yet somehow, it made sense. Outside the window, the sunset painted the lake with soft shades of gold, rose, and lavender. The colors moved so slowly they almost appeared frozen. "How long has this place existed?" Oliver finally asked. The woman poured hot water into another kettle. "I couldn't say." "You own it." "I care for it." "That isn't quite the same." Oliver frowned. "When was it built?" She looked toward the wooden ceiling beams. "They were already old when I arrived." "And when was that?" She smiled. "Oh." "A little after the old oak by the lake was still young." Oliver laughed. "You answer questions without answering them." "So I've been told." Another quiet moment settled over the room. No one seemed eager to interrupt it. Even silence felt like part of the conversation. Then Oliver noticed something peculiar. Along one wall stood dozens of teacups displayed on narrow wooden shelves. No two were alike. Some were simple white porcelain. Others were painted with tiny birds, mountains, stars, or flowers. One appeared to be carved from smooth dark wood. Another shimmered faintly like moonlight. Each cup held a small handwritten tag. Not prices. Not descriptions. Only names. Emma. Daniel. Margaret. Thomas. Lillian. Elias. Hundreds of names. Perhaps thousands. Oliver walked closer. "Are these your customers?" The woman joined him. "In a way." "What happens to them?" "They continue living." "And the cups?" "They stay." "Why?" She traced one finger along a pale blue teacup decorated with tiny forget-me-not flowers. "Every guest leaves behind something. A worry. A regret. A question. Sometimes only a single tear. The cup remembers. Oliver stared quietly. So every person who visits leaves a little lighter than they arrived. She finished the sentence with a kind smile. Before he could respond, the grandfather clock chimed softly. 1, 2, 3. Not the hour. Just 3 calm notes. The elderly woman looked toward the windows. The last guests will arrive soon. Oliver glanced outside. The sun rested exactly on the horizon. Yet somehow, it hadn't moved for what felt like nearly an hour. Time itself seemed content to linger here, unwilling to disturb the peace of the evening. For the first time in many years, Oliver realized he had stopped thinking about deadlines, unfinished work, and tomorrow's plans. There was only this quiet room, the scent of tea, the gentle fire, and the comforting feeling that somewhere beyond the ordinary world, there truly existed a place where sunset could last just a little longer. The tea shop that opened only at sunset. Chapter 3. A cup of tea for every traveler. Outside, the lake rested beneath a sky that seemed unwilling to let go of the evening. The sun remained balanced on the distant hills, neither rising nor setting, bathing the little tea shop in a warm amber glow that softened every corner of the room. Oliver had never seen a sunset last so long. He checked his watch again. The second hand moved. The minutes passed. Yet outside, the light remained exactly the same. It was as though the world beyond the windows had agreed to wait. The elderly woman noticed his puzzled glance. "You're watching the sky." "I am. It doesn't seem to be changing." She smiled as though she had heard the observation countless times before. "Not while someone still needs tea." Oliver opened his mouth to ask another question, but before he could speak, the brass bell above the door gave another gentle ring. A young woman stepped inside. She looked to be in her early 30s, wearing a light gray coat and carrying a small suitcase that had clearly traveled many miles. Her dark hair was tied loosely behind her shoulders, and although she smiled politely, there was a quiet sadness resting behind her eyes. "Good evening," she said softly. The elderly woman nodded. "Welcome, Amelia." The visitor looked surprised. "I don't believe we've met." "We haven't. And yet you know my name." The woman only smiled. "Please, come in." Amelia placed her suitcase beside the door and settled into a chair near the window, where she could see the peaceful lake. Without asking a single question, the elderly woman selected a small porcelain teapot decorated with tiny white lilies. She measured delicate silver tea leaves into it, poured steaming water, and waited patiently. Oliver noticed she never looked at a recipe. She simply knew. Moments later, she placed the cup before Amelia. The aroma drifting from it reminded Oliver of spring mornings after fresh rain. Amelia took one careful sip. Almost immediately, her expression softened. A tear rolled gently down her cheek. "I'm sorry," she whispered. "There is nothing to apologize for," the woman replied kindly. "I had forgotten my father's garden." Oliver looked up. "My father planted lilies every spring," Amelia continued quietly. "When I was little, we'd sit together on an old wooden bench before breakfast." She smiled through her tears. "I haven't remembered that garden in years." The elderly woman poured herself a cup of plain hot water. "Some memories become quiet. They never leave. They simply wait." Amelia closed her eyes for a peaceful moment. "I've been moving from city to city for work. I kept telling myself I'd visit home next year." She smiled sadly. "There always seemed to be another deadline." The woman nodded with understanding. "Life has a habit of convincing us there will always be more time." Silence settled gently around them. Not awkward silence. Comfortable silence. The kind shared between old friends watching rain fall beyond a window. A few moments later, the bell rang once more. This time, an elderly gentleman entered with slow, steady steps. He carried no luggage. Only a walking stick polished smooth by many years of use. His wool coat smelled faintly of cedar wood and cold mountain air. "Evening," he said warmly. "Good evening, Arthur," the woman replied. He chuckled. "You remembered." "I always do." Arthur laughed softly as he removed his hat. "I suppose that's true." Oliver blinked. Unlike the others, Arthur didn't seem surprised that the woman knew his name. "You've been here before?" Oliver asked. "Oh, several times over many years." "You found the road again?" Arthur smiled. "I never looked for it. It simply appeared whenever life became too loud." The elderly woman prepared another cup. This tea was deep amber with hints of cinnamon and roasted chestnut. Arthur inhaled slowly before taking his first sip. His weathered face brightened. "My wife's apple pie." He laughed quietly. "I can almost smell it cooling on the windowsill." He looked toward the fire. "We were married for 53 years. Oliver remained silent. Arthur continued. "After she passed away, I thought happiness had packed its bags and left with her." He gently held the warm cup between his hands. "But every time I come here," he smiled, "I remember that love doesn't disappear. It simply changes its address." The elderly woman lowered her eyes respectfully. "She would be pleased you've remembered." Arthur nodded. "I believe she would." The fire crackled softly. Outside, tiny birds landed along the edge of the lake before lifting gracefully into the glowing sky. No one hurried them. Everything here moved at its own peaceful pace. Then the bell rang again. A boy of perhaps 12 years old stepped carefully inside. He wore an oversized backpack that looked almost larger than he was. His freckles stood out against cheeks flushed from walking. He hesitated near the doorway. "I'm sorry," he said. "I think I may be lost." The elderly woman smiled warmly. "Most people who arrive here are." The boy laughed nervously. "My name's Ethan." "I know." She reached beneath the counter and brought out the smallest teacup Oliver had yet seen. It was painted with tiny blue birds soaring through white clouds. Instead of tea, she poured warm milk with honey and a pinch of fragrant herbs. Ethan looked uncertain. "My parents always said not to accept drinks from strangers." "Wise advice." She smiled kindly. "But perhaps tonight. You've arrived among friends." After a moment, Ethan accepted the cup. He took a cautious sip. Then another. His anxious shoulders slowly relaxed. "I was scared," he admitted. "I got separated during our hiking trip. I kept pretending I wasn't afraid." The elderly woman nodded. "Being brave doesn't mean never feeling frightened. It means continuing to walk kindly, even while you are." The boy smiled. "My grandfather used to say something like that." "He sounds like a thoughtful man." "He is. I miss visiting him." Oliver noticed something remarkable. Every guest who entered the tea shop seemed to leave behind a different burden. Not because the tea erased sadness, but because it reminded them that joy had never truly disappeared. It had simply been waiting beneath the surface, like stars hidden behind daylight. As evening continued its impossible pause, Oliver realized something else. No two cups were ever the same. No two stories were the same. Yet every person who crossed the threshold left wearing the same quiet expression. Peace. Not excitement. Not amazement. Just the gentle peace that comes from remembering who you are beneath all the noise of everyday life. The elderly woman carried an empty tray toward the shelves lined with countless teacups. She selected 3 new cups and placed them carefully among the others. Each seemed to glow faintly in the warm light. Oliver looked at the names she wrote beneath them. Amelia, Arthur, Ethan. The ink shimmered for only a heartbeat before settling into the porcelain as though it had always been there. Oliver frowned gently. "I don't remember you writing those." She smiled without turning around. "Some things are written long before the pen touches the page." Oliver looked once more toward the glowing sunset outside. For the first time, He began to wonder if the tea shop wasn't simply serving tea. Perhaps it was quietly collecting something far more precious. Not memories, not stories, but the moments when a human heart remembered how to feel at home. The tea shop that opened only at sunset. Chapter 4. The woman who remembered every name. The evening remained wrapped in its endless golden glow. Outside, the lake reflected the sky so perfectly that it was impossible to tell where the water ended and the heavens began. A gentle breeze wandered across its surface, carrying tiny ripples that shimmered like brushed silk. Inside the tea shop, the fire crackled softly. The scent of chamomile, cinnamon, lavender, and fresh cedar drifted lazily through the room, blending into an aroma so comforting that Oliver felt he had known it all his life. Amelia sat peacefully by the window with her empty teacup. Arthur quietly watched the dancing flames. Young Ethan had curled up in a large armchair, reading a weathered storybook he had discovered on one of the lower shelves. No one spoke. Yet somehow the silence never felt empty. It felt complete. Oliver glanced again toward the elderly woman. She moved gracefully around the shop, straightening books that were already straight, polishing cups that already gleamed, and tending to plants that seemed to flourish without needing any care. Every movement was unhurried. Every step seemed perfectly timed with the quiet rhythm of the room. Finally, Oliver asked the question that had been resting in his mind since he arrived. "You seem to know everyone." The woman looked up from a tiny potted fern she was watering. "I know the ones who find their way here. But you've never met them. Not in the ordinary sense." She smiled gently. Oliver leaned forward. "Then how do you remember every name?" The woman carried the watering can back to the counter before answering. "Names are curious things. They are often the first gift we receive. And sometimes the last thing we truly hear." Oliver waited. She folded a linen towel with slow, careful hands. "When people enter this shop, they introduce themselves without speaking." "I don't understand." "I know." She smiled. "That is perfectly all right." The old grandfather clock gave a soft tick. Tick, tick, tick. The sound seemed slower than before, as though even time had chosen to rest for a while. Oliver looked toward the rows of teacups lining the wall. "There must be hundreds." The woman followed his gaze. "There are." "And everyone belongs to someone?" "Yes." "What happens if they come back?" "They use the same cup." Oliver walked closer to the shelves. Each teacup was unique. One was painted with tiny mountains dusted in snow. Another carried blue waves rolling beneath silver stars. One had delicate hummingbirds circling wildflowers. Another was decorated with little foxes wandering through autumn forests. None were repeated. "They're beautiful. They become beautiful." "What do you mean?" The woman lifted a plain white cup from an empty shelf. "When someone arrives for the first time, their cup begins like this. Simple, unpainted, quiet." She gently traced one finger around its rim. "After they leave, it remembers." Oliver blinked. "Remembers what?" "The kindness they offered, the hope they rediscovered, the peace they carried home." She turned the cup toward him. For just a brief moment, Oliver thought he saw tiny golden leaves slowly appearing beneath the smooth glaze. When he blinked again, the cup was plain once more. Perhaps it had only been the warm firelight. Or perhaps not. Oliver smiled. "I'm beginning to think nothing here behaves the way it should." The woman laughed softly. "My dear traveler, who decides how things should behave?" Her question lingered gently between them. Oliver found that he had no answer. A few minutes later, Arthur stood and wandered toward a small bookshelf tucked into the far corner of the shop. It was unlike the others. Instead of tea tins or porcelain cups, it held old journals bound in leather, cloth, and faded canvas. Some looked over a century old. Others appeared almost new. "What are these?" Oliver asked. Arthur smiled knowingly. "I wondered the same thing during my first visit." The elderly woman joined them. "They are guest journals." Oliver reached toward one. "May I?" "You may." He carefully opened the nearest book. The first page contained only a single sentence written in elegant handwriting. "Tonight I remembered the sound of my mother's laughter." The next journal read, "I finally forgave myself." Another, "I stopped being afraid of tomorrow." Another, "The mountains still remembered my name." None of the entries were signed. None mentioned dates. Only quiet thoughts. Tiny moments of healing. Oliver continued turning pages. Some contained only a few words. Others filled entire sheets with gentle reflections. Not one spoke of fame, success, money, or achievements. Instead, people wrote about ordinary things. The smell of fresh bread, watching snow fall, holding someone's hand, the comfort of returning home. Simple memories, yet each carried a surprising weight. Oliver closed the journal carefully. "I've visited museums all over the world. I've read famous books. But these," he looked thoughtfully at the shelves, "feel more valuable somehow." The woman nodded. People often mistake important things for valuable things. The two are not always the same. The brass bell chimed once again. This time, no one entered. Oliver looked toward the door. It had never opened. "Did someone leave?" he asked. The woman glanced toward the empty entrance. "No." "Then why did it ring?" She smiled. "Someone chose kindness." Oliver frowned. "Somewhere." She nodded. "The bell has many reasons to sing." Arthur chuckled quietly. "I stopped trying to explain that years ago." Outside, a pair of robins landed beneath the maple tree beside the lake. One found a tiny seed. Instead of eating it, the bird nudged it gently toward the other. The elderly woman watched through the window. "There." Oliver followed her gaze. "The bell heard that." He smiled. "You mean, because one bird shared with another?" She nodded. "Kindness is never as small as it appears." The room fell peacefully silent once more. Oliver looked around the tea shop with fresh eyes. The carefully arranged cups. The journals filled with quiet truths. The sleepy black cat by the fire. The lanterns glowing outside. Everything seemed connected by something invisible. Not magic in the grand stories people often told. Something gentler. Something closer to gratitude. As the endless sunset continued to bathe the tea shop in golden light, Oliver realized he could no longer remember why he had been in such a hurry before finding this place. His endless list of unfinished articles. His crowded schedule. His restless search for the next destination. They felt strangely distant now. For the first time in years, he wasn't wondering where he should go next. He was simply grateful to be exactly where he was. The elderly woman noticed the peaceful expression on his face. Without a word, she reached beneath the counter and placed another empty porcelain cup on the wooden shelf behind her. Unlike the others, it carried no painted flowers, no stars, no mountains, only a tiny card resting beside it. On the card, written in graceful ink, was a single name: Oliver. He stared at it in quiet surprise. "I haven't even left yet." The woman smiled, her silver eyes reflecting the warm glow of the fire. "No, you haven't. But every journey begins long before the traveler realizes they're already on the way." The tea shop that opened only at sunset. Chapter 5. The garden that bloomed only at dusk. The little brass bell remained quiet. Inside the tea shop, the fire had settled into glowing embers that pulsed gently with warmth. Shadows danced lazily across the wooden floor, and the old grandfather clock continued its patient ticking, never hurried, never late. Oliver found himself looking once more at the empty porcelain cup that bore his name. It rested on the shelf exactly where the elderly woman had placed it. Simple, unpainted, waiting. He wondered what it might look like someday. Would it carry mountains, stars, perhaps tiny maple leaves like those that lined the forgotten road? Or would it remain plain forever? The thought lingered only for a moment before the woman quietly approached. "Would you like to see the garden?" Oliver smiled. "I didn't know there was one. Most visitors don't." She reached for a small iron lantern hanging beside the doorway. Its flame glowed softly without smoke or sound, casting a warm circle of golden light. "Come." She opened a narrow wooden door at the back of the tea shop. Oliver was certain it hadn't been there before. Beyond it stretched a winding stone path bordered by moss so soft it looked like green velvet. The evening air embraced him with the fragrance of lavender, jasmine, fresh rain, and something sweet he couldn't quite name. The garden was unlike any he had ever seen. It wasn't large, yet somehow it felt endless. Flower beds curved gently around tiny streams that shimmered beneath the golden sky. Small wooden bridges crossed the water, while smooth stones formed peaceful walking paths beneath ancient cherry and maple trees. Thousands of flowers filled the garden. White blossoms, deep blue wildflowers, golden daisies, purple foxgloves, soft pink camellias, silver moonflowers. Yet something was unusual. Every flower remained tightly closed. Oliver looked around. "They're sleeping." The elderly woman nodded. "They're waiting." "For what?" She smiled toward the horizon. "For sunset." Oliver laughed quietly. "But it's already sunset." "Exactly." As if the flowers had been listening, the first tiny blossom slowly unfolded. Then another, and another. Within moments, the entire garden awakened. Petals opened in perfect silence. No sudden movement, only graceful unfolding, like thousands of tiny sighs carried by the evening breeze. The colors became richer with every passing second. Blues deepened into sapphire. Reds glowed like polished ruby. Whites shimmered with the faintest hint of gold. Oliver had photographed gardens around the world. The famous tulips of the Netherlands. Cherry blossoms in Japan. Wildflower meadows beneath the Rocky Mountains. None had prepared him for this. "It's beautiful." The woman smiled. "They're happy." "You mean the flowers?" "Yes. They spend the whole day dreaming of evening." Oliver knelt beside a small cluster of pale blue blossoms shaped like tiny bells. Their fragrance reminded him of cool mornings after summer rain. "I've never seen these before." "You wouldn't. They grow nowhere else." He reached out, hesitating before touching one delicate petal. "May I?" "They don't mind." His fingertips brushed the blossom. At once, a faint image shimmered inside his mind. A little girl laughing while chasing butterflies through a sunny field. A father running after her, pretending not to catch up. The laughter felt warm, bright, completely ordinary, yet somehow unforgettable. The vision disappeared almost as quickly as it had come. Oliver blinked. "What was that?" "A wish," the woman answered softly. He looked at her in surprise. "A wish." She nodded. "Every flower grows from one." He glanced around the endless garden. "All of these. Every single one." She walked slowly beside the winding path, her lantern casting gentle pools of light across the stones. People often believe wishes disappear when they're forgotten. They don't. They simply become quiet. Oliver looked thoughtfully at the blossoms. "So these flowers are forgotten wishes. They are hopes that were once carried in someone's heart." The breeze stirred the petals. They seemed almost to glow beneath the endless sunset. A white flower swayed gently beside Oliver. Again, a quiet image appeared. An elderly woman knitting a tiny sweater for a grandchild she hadn't yet met. Nearby, a crimson blossom revealed a young musician practicing long after everyone else had gone home. Another showed two brothers planting an oak tree together. None of the wishes were grand. None involved fame or fortune. Most were wonderfully simple. To spend more time with family. To forgive an old friend. To learn something new. To watch one more sunrise. Oliver smiled. They're beautiful because they're real. The elderly woman nodded. The smallest wishes often grow the deepest roots. They continued walking. Soon they reached the center of the garden. There stood an enormous maple tree. Its trunk was wide enough that 3 people together could barely wrap their arms around it. Its branches spread gracefully over the garden like protective hands. Tiny lanterns hung among the leaves, glowing softly though no one had lit them. Beneath the tree rested a weathered wooden bench. The woman gently placed her lantern on the ground. This tree has watched every sunset since the tea shop first opened. Oliver looked upward. How old is it? She smiled. It stopped counting long ago. He laughed. You never answer questions the ordinary way. The ordinary answers rarely satisfy extraordinary questions. They sat together on the bench. Neither felt any need to hurry the silence. After a while, Oliver noticed something carved into the old wood beside him. Not names, not dates, just a single sentence. Take only the piece you need. Leave enough for tomorrow's traveler. He traced the words with one finger. Who wrote this? The elderly woman looked toward the glowing lake beyond the trees. I don't remember. Then she smiled gently. Perhaps. Everyone did. The breeze carried the scent of fresh tea across the garden. Somewhere nearby, a tiny wind chime sang a single clear note. Oliver closed his eyes. For the first time in many years, his thoughts became wonderfully quiet. No unfinished work. No deadlines. No endless planning. Only the gentle rustling of maple leaves and the fragrance of flowers blooming beneath an endless sunset. As they prepared to return to the tea shop, Oliver glanced back at the sea of blossoms. One flower near the path had not yet opened. It was small, with pale green petals wrapped tightly together. That one didn't bloom. The elderly woman followed his gaze. It isn't ready. Why not? She lifted the lantern once more. It still belongs to someone who hasn't remembered their wish. Oliver looked at the unopened flower until it disappeared into the soft golden light. Without knowing why, he felt certain that someday, somewhere, a traveler would pause, remember something precious they had nearly forgotten, and at that very moment, that little flower would quietly open beneath the evening sky. Behind them, the garden continued to bloom in peaceful silence, patiently waiting for every forgotten hope to find its way home. The tea shop that opened only at sunset. Chapter 6. Stories left inside empty teacups. The stone path led them gently back toward the tea shop. Behind them, the garden continued to glow beneath the endless sunset. Thousands of blossoms swayed peacefully in the evening breeze, as if whispering to one another in a language only flowers could understand. Oliver glanced back one last time. The unopened green flower was almost hidden among the others. For a brief moment, he thought he saw it tremble ever so slightly. Then the breeze carried the leaves across his view, and it was gone. When they stepped inside, the familiar warmth of the tea shop welcomed them once again. The fire glowed softly. The old grandfather clock continued its slow, patient rhythm. The sleepy black cat stretched lazily, opened one golden eye just enough to acknowledge their return, then curled back into a comfortable ball beside the hearth. Arthur had fallen asleep in the armchair nearest the fire. His hands rested peacefully upon his walking stick. Amelia sat by the window, quietly sketching the lake in a small notebook. Young Ethan had finished reading his storybook and now watched tiny sparks drift upward inside the fireplace. The room felt wonderfully still. It reminded Oliver of snowfall. Not because snow was falling, but because everything seemed wrapped in the same quiet peace. The elderly woman walked behind the counter and carefully gathered the empty teacups. She handled each one as though it were something precious. Oliver noticed that she never stacked them. Each cup was carried alone. each placed gently upon a soft linen cloth before she reached for the next. "You treat them almost like living things," he said. She smiled. "In a way, they are." Oliver looked curiously at the nearest cup. "But they're empty." She shook her head. "No cup is ever truly empty." He laughed softly. "It certainly looks empty." The woman carried Arthur's cup toward the shelves. "Come. There is something I'd like to show you." She led Oliver to a small oak table tucked beside the bookshelf of guest journals. Upon it rested an old brass candle holder with a single white candle burning quietly. She placed Arthur's empty teacup beneath the flame. Nothing happened. At least, not immediately. Then, almost too gently to notice, the last curl of steam rose from the bottom of the cup. It drifted upward, twisting gracefully through the candlelight. Instead of disappearing, the steam slowly gathered into tiny shimmering images. Oliver watched in amazement. There was Arthur as a young man, laughing beside a lake. A woman stood beside him, holding her shoes in one hand while walking barefoot through the shallow water. The scene changed. Now they were planting apple trees behind a small white farmhouse. Another moment. The two of them danced quietly in a kitchen while bread baked in the oven. No words could be heard. Only warmth. Only joy. The tiny images faded as gently as they had appeared. The cup became still once more. Oliver stared at it in silence. He searched for the right words. "I just watched someone's life." The elderly woman nodded. "Only a few moments. The cup remembers much more." He looked at her. "So every empty cup keeps a story." She smiled. "Not the whole story. Only the moments that mattered most." Oliver remained quiet for a while. It struck him that the visions had contained no birthdays, no promotions, no arguments, no grand achievements. Only simple moments. Walking together, sharing meals, planting trees, holding hands. The memories that remained were not the loudest ones. They were the gentlest, as if life itself quietly chose what deserved to be remembered. The woman carefully washed Arthur's cup in warm water. When she finished, she dried it with a linen cloth embroidered with tiny maple leaves. Not a single drop remained. Then she returned it to its place upon the shelf. "It's ready," she whispered. "Ready for what?" Oliver asked. "For the next visit." Curiosity settled gently over Oliver. "What about my cup?" The elderly woman looked toward the plain white cup bearing his name. "It is still listening. Listening. It has only just met you." Oliver smiled. "So it doesn't know my story yet." She looked kindly into his eyes. "Oh. It already knows your story. It is waiting to discover which parts you will choose to keep." Those words lingered in the quiet room. Oliver thought of the articles he had written, the flights he had taken, the countless photographs stored on hard drives. He had spent years collecting places. But how many moments had he truly kept? He couldn't remember. Not really. The brass bell chimed softly. No one entered. The elderly woman smiled toward the doorway. "The wind," Oliver guessed. She shook her head. Someone remembered. He waited for her to explain. She didn't. Instead, she picked up another empty cup from the shelf. This one was painted with tiny blue forget-me-nots. "There are many ways to remember." She held the cup beneath the candlelight. Again, the final traces of warmth rose like silver mist. This time, the images belonged to a little girl. She sat on her grandfather's shoulders while watching ducks swim across a pond. Then she appeared older, carefully learning to ride a bicycle. Another memory. The grandfather quietly teaching her how to whistle beneath a great oak tree. The final image lingered the longest. The old man sitting alone on a porch, smiling as he unfolded a handwritten letter. The words inside the letter could not be seen. But his smile said everything. The steam slowly disappeared. Oliver felt a quiet ache in his heart. "I don't know these people." The elderly woman nodded. "You don't need to. The feeling is enough." Oliver understood. Some stories belonged to everyone, not because they shared the same people, but because they shared the same love. He wandered toward the shelves once more. There were hundreds of cups, perhaps thousands, each carrying tiny painted symbols, each holding gentle echoes of lives well lived. Then, tucked away on the highest shelf, he noticed one unlike all the others. It was made of deep midnight blue porcelain. Tiny silver stars shimmered across its surface. Unlike every other cup, there was no name beneath it, only a single crescent moon. Oliver pointed. "Whose cup is that?" For the first time since he had arrived, the elderly woman did not answer immediately. Her peaceful smile softened into something quieter, almost nostalgic. She looked toward the cup as though greeting an old friend. "That cup," she said gently, "has been waiting longer than any other." "For whom?" She looked out the window. The endless sunset reflected across the lake in quiet gold. "I don't know." Oliver frowned. "You don't know. I remember every traveler." She smiled faintly. "But not every story has reached its ending." The room fell silent once more. Even the old clock seemed to pause between its ticks. Oliver looked back at the mysterious blue cup. For just an instant, he thought he saw a tiny swirl of steam rise from it. Not enough to form a memory, only enough to suggest one was still waiting, somewhere beyond the forgotten road, beyond the quiet hills, beyond tomorrow. Someone was still making their way toward the tea shop that opened only at sunset. Chapter 7. The Lanterns That Guided Lost Hearts. The midnight blue teacup remained on the highest shelf. Its silver stars caught the warm light of the fireplace, shimmering so softly that Oliver couldn't tell whether they reflected the flames or carried a light of their own. He looked at it once more before turning away. Some questions, he was beginning to understand, did not ask to be answered immediately. They asked to be carried. The tea shop settled once again into its familiar stillness. Arthur continued his peaceful nap by the fire. Amelia quietly finished her sketch of the lake, adding the last gentle strokes with a charcoal pencil. Young Ethan had wandered to the window, watching dragonflies drift above the water outside. The elderly woman stepped behind the counter and reached for her green shawl. Without a word, she wrapped it around her shoulders and picked up the same little iron lantern Oliver had seen earlier. Its golden flame burned without flickering. She looked toward him with a kind smile. "Would you care for a short walk?" Oliver nodded almost immediately. "I was hoping you'd ask." She chuckled softly. "I thought you might." Together they stepped outside. The evening greeted them with cool, fragrant air. Somewhere in the distance, an owl called only once before the countryside returned to silence. The lake reflected the endless sunset with such perfect clarity that it appeared as though another world rested beneath the water. They followed the narrow stone path until it joined the forgotten road. Oliver immediately noticed the wooden lanterns hanging from the maple branches. Each glowed with the same warm amber light. None were bright. None demanded attention. Yet together they gently illuminated every bend of the road. "They're beautiful," Oliver whispered. "They've always been here." The elderly woman nodded. "For as long as anyone remembers." "Who lights them every evening?" She smiled. "No one." Oliver laughed quietly. "I should have guessed." The woman walked a few more steps before speaking again. "They awaken when they are needed." Oliver looked carefully at the nearest lantern. Its wooden frame had been carved with tiny vines and leaves. The glass was slightly uneven, as though shaped by hand long ago. Inside, there was no candle, no oil, no electric bulb. Only a small golden light floating peacefully in the center. "What keeps it burning?" The woman rested one hand gently against the tree beside her. "A promise." He glanced toward her. "What kind of promise?" The kind people make when they choose hope instead of fear. Oliver considered the answer. As usual, it raised more questions than it solved. Yet somehow, he no longer minded. They continued walking until they reached the old stone bridge where Oliver had first discovered the hidden road. The stream below flowed so gently that fallen maple leaves floated across its surface without making the slightest sound. The elderly woman stopped in the middle of the bridge. "Stand here." Oliver did. "Now close your eyes." He hesitated only briefly before doing as she asked. The world became wonderfully quiet. He heard the gentle movement of water, the whisper of leaves overhead, a distant breeze moving through the forest. Then, footsteps. Not beside him. Many footsteps. Slow, unhurried, as though dozens of travelers were quietly crossing the bridge. Some walked alone. Some laughed softly together. Some carried walking sticks. Others hummed gentle melodies. Oliver opened his eyes. The bridge was empty. No one stood there except the two of them. He looked around in surprise. "I heard people." "So did I." "You heard them too?" The woman nodded. "They've all walked this road." "When?" She smiled. "Different evenings." Oliver looked back along the lantern-lit path. "You mean?" "The road remembers." The words settled into the evening like falling leaves. As they began walking again, Oliver noticed something he hadn't seen before. Near the base of nearly every lantern stood a tiny stone. Each stone was smooth and rounded. Upon every one was carved a single word: patience, hope, home, wonder, kindness, courage, gratitude. There were dozens of them, perhaps hundreds. No word appeared twice. Oliver knelt beside one that simply read, "Listen." He brushed away a few fallen leaves. "Who carved these?" The elderly woman smiled. "The travelers. I've never seen anyone stop to carve them." "They didn't." He looked puzzled. "They carried the words inside themselves. The stones merely remembered." Oliver gently touched the carved word. For a heartbeat, he heard a young woman's laughter carried on the breeze. It vanished as quickly as it came. He smiled. "I'm beginning to think everything remembers." The woman laughed quietly. "Only the things we treat with kindness." The road curved through the trees until they reached the very first lantern. Unlike the others, this one was much older. Its wood had darkened with age. Tiny cracks spread across its frame, yet it still glowed with the warmest light of them all. The elderly woman stopped before it. "This was the first." Oliver looked upward. "It seems brighter. It has welcomed the most travelers." He studied it carefully. "Does it ever go out?" She was silent for a long moment. "Only once." His curiosity returned. "What happened?" A traveler arrived believing there was nothing left worth hoping for. The woman's voice became softer. "They walked the road without noticing the light. They entered the tea shop without tasting the warmth. They left before the sunset ended." Oliver looked at her. "And the lantern?" "It grew dim. For many days. But—" She smiled again. "One spring evening, that same traveler returned." "What changed?" "They had learned something." "What?" She looked toward the quiet lake in the distance. "That even the smallest light can help someone find their way." The old lantern brightened almost imperceptibly, as though remembering the story itself. They remained there for several peaceful minutes. The breeze carried the scent of pine needles and distant rain. Somewhere nearby, crickets began their gentle evening song. Oliver realized he had not once thought about the outside world since arriving. His phone still rested forgotten inside his jacket pocket. He had no desire to check it. The silence no longer felt unfamiliar. It felt like home. As they turned back toward the tea shop, he noticed something moving far down the forgotten road. At first, he thought it was only mist. Then the shape slowly became clearer. A solitary traveler, walking steadily beneath the lanterns, carrying an old leather satchel over one shoulder. Their face could not yet be seen. Yet every lantern along the road grew just a little brighter as the traveler approached. Oliver smiled. Another guest. The elderly woman watched the distant figure with quiet affection. Yes, but this one, she paused, has been finding their way here for a very long time. The breeze stirred the maple leaves overhead. The lanterns glowed like tiny stars among the branches. And somewhere, just beyond the next bend in the forgotten road, the traveler continued walking toward the tea shop that opened only at sunset, unaware that someone had been waiting for them across countless evenings. Perhaps, Oliver thought, some journeys were never about reaching a place. Perhaps they were about becoming the person who could finally recognize it when it appeared. Chapter 8. A Letter Written to Tomorrow. The traveler walked slowly beneath the lanterns. Each step was calm and unhurried, as though there was nowhere else in the world they needed to be. The lanterns glowed a little brighter as they passed beneath them, not with excitement, but with quiet recognition. Oliver stood beside the elderly woman, watching from the edge of the stone path. "Do you know who it is?" he asked. "I do." "Have they visited before?" She smiled. "Only once." "Then why does it feel as though you've been expecting them?" The woman looked toward the distant figure. "Because some promises take many years to keep." The traveler finally reached the little wooden bridge. He was an older gentleman with gentle eyes and silver hair tucked beneath a worn brown hat. A weathered leather satchel rested across his shoulder, its edges softened by countless miles of walking. He paused halfway across the bridge. Instead of continuing immediately, he looked down at the quiet stream. He smiled. Then he whispered something Oliver couldn't hear. Only after that did he continue toward the tea shop. The brass bell above the door gave its familiar, welcoming chime. "Good evening," the traveler said. His voice carried the warmth of someone who had spent a lifetime speaking kindly. The elderly woman bowed her head. "Welcome home, Elias." The man smiled. "I wondered if you would still remember." "I always remember." Oliver noticed something different. Unlike every other guest, Elias looked around the tea shop with the comfortable familiarity of someone returning to an old friend's home. His eyes rested on the fireplace, the bookshelves, the sleeping black cat, the garden beyond the window. Finally, they settled upon the woman herself. "It's exactly as I remembered." She chuckled softly. "Only a little older." "So are we." They both laughed. It was a quiet laugh, shared between people who understood that growing older was not something to fear. The woman prepared a teacup unlike any Oliver had yet seen. It was cream-colored porcelain with tiny golden swallows circling its rim. She poured a pale amber tea into it. The fragrance drifted through the room. Orange blossoms, fresh lemon leaves, wild honey, and something wonderfully familiar that Oliver couldn't quite identify. Elias took a slow sip. He closed his eyes. For several peaceful moments, no one spoke. When he finally opened them again, they shimmered with quiet gratitude. "My mother's kitchen." He smiled. "Every Sunday afternoon." The elderly woman nodded. She always added one extra spoonful of honey. Elias laughed in surprise. "She did. I'd forgotten." "No," the woman corrected gently. "You only misplaced the memory." Oliver smiled. The distinction mattered somehow. Memories, he was learning, were not things people lost. They simply waited patiently until they were invited home. After finishing his tea, Elias removed the old leather satchel from his shoulder and placed it carefully upon the wooden table. The buckles had become smooth with age. The leather carried the rich scent of cedar and rain. He opened it slowly. Inside were dozens of neatly tied envelopes. Each one was sealed with dark green wax. Each carried a handwritten name. Oliver leaned forward. "Letters." Elias nodded. "I've been delivering them for many years." "A postman." "In a way." The elderly woman smiled knowingly. "The finest one I've ever met." Oliver noticed something unusual. None of the envelopes had addresses. Only names. Emma, James, Margaret, Lucas, Sophia. Names from every generation, every age. "How do you know where they belong?" Oliver asked. Elias smiled. "I don't. You don't. I simply carry them. And eventually, they find the person who is ready." Oliver frowned. "That sounds impossible." Elias laughed gently. "So does this tea shop." Oliver couldn't argue with that. The elderly woman carefully picked up one envelope. It looked older than the others. The paper had yellowed slightly with time. Its wax seal remained perfectly unbroken. "Still waiting?" she asked. Elias nodded. 37 years. Oliver stared. "You've carried one letter for 37 years?" "I have." "Why?" "It hasn't reached tomorrow yet." Oliver blinked. "I'm afraid you've lost me." Elias rested his hands upon the satchel. "Most letters are written for today." He looked toward the glowing sunset beyond the window. "But a few are written for the day someone finally needs to read them." The room grew wonderfully quiet. Even Arthur opened his eyes to listen. Amelia set aside her sketchbook. Young Ethan wandered closer. It felt as though everyone already understood something Oliver was only beginning to discover. The elderly woman carefully turned the old envelope over. There was no return address. Only a single sentence written in elegant handwriting. "Open when your heart is ready." Oliver whispered the words aloud. "They're beautiful." "They're patient," Elias replied. Curiosity gently filled the room. "Have you ever read them?" Oliver asked. "Oh no. They don't belong to me." "Then how do you know they're ready?" Elias smiled. "I never do. The letters tell me." Oliver laughed. "I've stopped saying things are impossible." "A wise decision." Arthur chuckled from his armchair. "You'll enjoy this place much more." Everyone smiled. The tea shop seemed almost brighter. Not because the fire had grown stronger, but because shared laughter had quietly warmed the room. Elias reached into the satchel once more. This time he removed a tiny leather notebook. Unlike the guest journals, it was worn almost smooth. Its pages had softened with years of careful use. "What is that?" Oliver asked. "My list. Of deliveries." "No. Of sunsets." Oliver tilted his head. "You've counted them?" "I've remembered them." He gently opened the notebook. Instead of dates, each page held a brief observation. "The evening smelled of apples." "A child laughed beside the bridge." "The lake reflected 7 swans." "The first autumn leaf arrived today." "Someone forgave themselves before sunset." Oliver slowly turned another page. And another. Not one entry spoke of sadness without also mentioning hope. Not one described loss without noticing beauty nearby. It wasn't a record of passing days. It was a record of paying attention. Oliver looked up. "You've spent your life collecting moments." Elias smiled. "I nearly spent it collecting miles." "What changed?" "I realized people rarely remember how far they traveled. They remember who walked beside them." The words settled gently into Oliver's heart. He thought about all the places he had rushed through with a camera in his hands. How often had he paused long enough to truly notice the evening air, or the sound of birds settling into the trees, or the comfort of simply sitting still? Perhaps not often enough. Outside, the lanterns glowed steadily beneath the maple branches. The endless sunset painted the lake with soft gold and rose. The black cat stretched, yawned, and quietly leapt onto the windowsill. It gazed toward the forgotten road, as if waiting. The elderly woman followed its gaze. Then she smiled. "There is still one more letter." Elias looked into the satchel. His peaceful expression became thoughtful. Slowly, very carefully, he lifted out a final envelope. Unlike all the others, it was made of pale blue paper. No name, no seal, only a tiny drawing of a teacup beneath a setting sun. Oliver looked at it with quiet curiosity. "Who is that one for?" Elias held the envelope gently between his hands. "I've never known." The elderly woman looked at Oliver, then at the envelope, then back to the quiet lake beyond the window. For the first time since Oliver had arrived at the tea shop, neither of them smiled. Instead, they shared a knowing glance that carried the gentle weight of a story still waiting to unfold. Chapter 9. The Last Sunset Before Winter. The pale blue envelope rested quietly on the wooden table. Its paper was smooth, almost luminous in the warm glow of the fireplace. The tiny drawing of a teacup beneath a setting sun seemed so delicately painted that Oliver wondered whether it had been drawn with ink or with light itself. No one reached for it. No one spoke. Even the grandfather clock seemed to soften its steady ticking, as though it, too, understood that some moments deserved silence before words. Outside, the lake remained wrapped in endless gold. But something had changed. Oliver noticed the breeze first. It carried a cooler breath than before. The maple leaves whispered a little louder. Far above, a small flock of geese crossed the glowing sky, their graceful formation stretching toward the distant horizon. "They're leaving," Ethan whispered from the window. The elderly woman nodded. "Winter is drawing near." Oliver looked outside in surprise. "But the sunset hasn't ended." She smiled gently. "It always feels endless. But even beautiful things must learn to rest." Oliver turned toward her. "So, tonight is different." She folded a linen cloth with slow, careful hands. "Once each year, the tea shop welcomes the final sunset before winter." The room grew still again. Arthur opened his eyes fully now. Amelia quietly closed her sketchbook. Even the black cat, who so often slept through everything, lifted its head and gazed toward the glowing windows. Elias placed his weathered satchel carefully beside his chair. "I almost missed it," he said with a gentle laugh. "You never have," the woman replied. "And you never will." Oliver stepped outside onto the little porch. The air felt wonderfully crisp. Across the lake, tiny wisps of mist had begun to gather, floating just above the water like pale silk. The mountains beyond looked softer somehow, their outlines fading into shades of lavender and blue. He noticed something else. The flowers in the garden that bloomed only at dusk were slowly bowing their heads. Not closing, simply bowing, as though greeting an old friend. The elderly woman joined him on the porch, carrying 2 warm cups of tea. She handed one to Oliver. "This blend is only prepared once each year." He inhaled its fragrance. It carried notes of roasted chestnuts, cinnamon bark, maple syrup, and a hint of smoked vanilla. It smelled like autumn itself. He took a careful sip. Warmth spread gently through him, not only through his hands and chest, but through memories he hadn't visited in years. He saw himself as a university student walking beneath rows of golden trees on a cool afternoon. He remembered buying roasted peanuts from an elderly street vendor who always smiled before saying, "Take a little extra." He remembered laughing with friends after an unexpected rainstorm. Tiny moments, ordinary moments, yet somehow they felt richer now than they ever had before. "I never realized," Oliver said quietly, "how much happiness can fit inside an ordinary day." The woman looked toward the lake. "It always has. We're simply too busy to notice." As they stood together, the first lantern nearest the bridge flickered softly. Then another, and another. Not because they were fading, because they were changing. Their warm amber glow slowly deepened into a rich golden hue, almost like candlelight reflected through honey. Oliver watched in amazement. "They've never looked like this before." "They're putting on their winter light," the woman explained. "They know the colder evenings are coming." He smiled. They prepare. They always prepare. So should we. Inside the tea shop, Arthur had begun placing extra logs beside the fireplace. Amelia carefully folded warm wool blankets that had been resting in a wicker basket. Ethan happily polished tiny brass lanterns with a soft cloth. No one had been asked. Everyone simply knew what needed doing. Oliver noticed this. Nobody gave them instructions. The elderly woman smiled. Kindness rarely waits to be invited. He quietly picked up another basket of firewood and carried it inside. No one thanked him. No one needed to. The simple act itself felt enough. As he stacked the wood beside the hearth, he realized something unexpected. For the first time in many years, helping someone didn't feel like another task. It felt like resting. Evenings settled a little deeper. The sunset remained beautiful, but its colors had begun to soften. Gold became amber. Amber slowly welcomed shades of rose. The lake reflected every change with quiet elegance. The elderly woman lit several small candles throughout the tea shop. Not because the room had grown dark, only because candlelight belonged to evenings like this. Arthur smiled as he watched the tiny flames. My wife always said the first candle of autumn should never be rushed. Amelia looked up. My grandmother used to say exactly the same thing. Arthur laughed. Perhaps grandmothers all attend the same secret meetings. Everyone chuckled softly. Even Ethan laughed. The tea shop felt warmer than ever. Not because of the fire. Because stories had begun weaving themselves together like threads in a well-loved quilt. Oliver's eyes drifted toward the pale blue envelope once more. It still rested on the table exactly where Elias had placed it. Untouched. Patient. Waiting. He couldn't help asking, "Doesn't it bother you?" Not knowing who it's for. Elias considered the question carefully before answering. Years ago. Yes. I wondered every evening. I imagined hundreds of possibilities. He smiled gently. But eventually, I realized something. What? The letter has never been late. Oliver looked thoughtfully at the envelope. So whoever receives it will receive it at exactly the right moment. Elias nodded, as all good things should. Outside, the breeze carried the scent of approaching winter. Some of the maple leaves had begun their slow descent, spinning lazily through the golden air before settling upon the forgotten road. Each leaf seemed to land without a sound. The elderly woman stepped onto the porch once more. She watched them with quiet affection. The trees are saying thank you. Oliver smiled. For what? For another beautiful season. He looked up into the branches. He had spent so much of his life looking ahead. Toward tomorrow. Toward the next destination. Toward the next deadline. He could not remember the last time he had simply stood beneath a tree and listened to the leaves. The black cat quietly joined them. It rubbed gently against Oliver's leg before sitting beside the elderly woman. Together, they watched the final autumn leaves drift across the glowing lake. Then, far across the water, a single star appeared. Not because the sun had disappeared. It hadn't. The star simply chose to arrive early. Oliver pointed toward it. I didn't think stars could appear before sunset ended. The elderly woman smiled without taking her eyes from the sky. Most evenings. They don't. She paused, her voice almost a whisper. But tonight, the heavens are making room for something that has been waiting a very long time. Oliver followed her gaze. The pale blue envelope lay inside the tea shop, untouched upon the table. Yet somehow, he could almost feel that its moment was drawing near. The tea shop that opened only at sunset. Chapter 10. The secret hidden beneath the tea shelf. The first star continued to shine above the lake. It was small, gentle, almost shy, yet its quiet light seemed to change the entire evening. Inside the tea shop, the warm glow of the fireplace mingled with candlelight, wrapping every corner of the room in soft amber hues. Shadows stretched lazily across the wooden floor, and the familiar fragrance of tea leaves, cedar, and fresh bread lingered in the air. Oliver found himself glancing once more toward the pale blue envelope. It remained untouched, waiting, as though it already knew that patience was part of its journey. The elderly woman quietly returned to arranging jars of tea upon the shelves behind the counter. She reached for a small tin resting near the very bottom shelf. As she gently slid it aside, something unexpected happened. A soft wooden click echoed through the room. Oliver looked up. The woman paused. For just a heartbeat, she seemed surprised. Then she smiled. "It has been a long time." "What has?" Oliver asked. Instead of answering, she knelt beside the lowest shelf. Her fingers traced the grain of the old oak. Hidden among its natural patterns was a tiny carved maple leaf. She pressed it gently. Another quiet click. The bottom shelf slowly shifted forward, revealing a narrow compartment no larger than a shoebox. Oliver blinked. "I never noticed that. Most people don't." She carefully reached inside. There was no treasure chest, no glittering jewels, only a small wooden box wrapped in faded green linen. The fabric looked centuries old, yet not a single thread had unraveled. The woman lifted it with both hands. She carried it to the table where the pale blue envelope still rested. Arthur smiled knowingly. "I wondered when it would open again." "You've seen it before?" Oliver asked. "Only once. Many winters ago." Amelia leaned forward with quiet curiosity. Ethan climbed onto his chair just high enough to see across the table. Even the black cat wandered over, settling gracefully beside the box as though it, too, had been waiting. The elderly woman untied the linen ribbon. Very slowly, she opened the lid. Inside rested 3 simple objects: a tiny brass key, a smooth river stone, and an old pocket watch. None appeared valuable, yet each had been polished with such care that they seemed almost luminous. Oliver frowned. "I expected something more." He searched for the right word. "Extraordinary." The woman smiled. "So do most people." She gently lifted the little brass key. It was no longer than Oliver's thumb. A tiny teacup had been carved into its handle. "What does it unlock?" he asked. The woman turned the key thoughtfully between her fingers. "A door." "Where?" She looked toward the window. "Sometimes. Inside a person." Oliver smiled. "I should have known." She laughed softly. "You're learning." Next she picked up the smooth river stone. Its surface had been worn perfectly round by flowing water. No carvings, no markings, only quiet simplicity. Oliver held it carefully. It felt pleasantly warm, almost alive. As his thumb brushed its surface, a memory surfaced without warning. He was 10 years old, standing beside a river with his father, neither of them speaking, both skipping flat stones across the water. He could almost hear the splashes. 1, 2, 3, 4. His father smiling as the stone danced farther than either of them expected. The memory faded gently. Oliver looked down at the stone in astonishment. "I haven't thought about that afternoon in years." The elderly woman nodded. "Some memories wait for the right touch." She accepted the stone and placed it back inside the box. Finally, she lifted the old pocket watch. Its silver casing had dulled with age. Tiny vines were engraved around its edges. Oliver expected her to wind it. Instead, she simply opened it. Inside, there were no numbers, no hands, only a tiny painted sunset beneath a lone maple tree. He looked at it in confusion. "It doesn't tell time." "No. It reminds people not to chase it." The woman closed the watch with a gentle click. "For many years, travelers asked me how to slow time." She smiled. "I discovered they were asking the wrong question." "What should they have asked?" "How do I notice it?" The room grew wonderfully quiet. Arthur nodded slowly. Amelia smiled to herself. Even Ethan seemed unusually thoughtful. Oliver looked at the old watch again. Perhaps time had never been rushing. Perhaps he had. The elderly woman carefully returned the 3 objects to the wooden box. But before closing it, she reached beneath the faded cloth lining. Her fingers paused. Then she withdrew something so thin that Oliver almost missed it. A folded piece of cream-colored paper. Its edges had softened with age. Unlike the letters Elias carried, this paper bore no envelope. The woman unfolded it carefully. Inside was a hand-drawn map. Not of countries. Not of roads. Only the tea shop, the lake, the bridge, the lanterns, and the garden that bloomed only at dusk. In the lower corner someone had written, in graceful handwriting, "The road appears only to those who have begun looking inward." Oliver read the words twice. Then a third time. "They're beautiful." The woman nodded. They were written by the very first traveler. The first. She smiled gently. The first person who ever found this place. Oliver's eyes widened. "You've met them." A peaceful silence settled over the room. Finally she answered. "Only once. Long ago." "What were they like?" The woman folded the map with extraordinary care. "They asked more questions than you." Everyone laughed. Oliver smiled. "That must have been exhausting." "A little." Her eyes sparkled. "But wonderful." She returned the map to the box. As she prepared to close the lid, the pale blue envelope beside it stirred ever so slightly. No breeze entered the room. No one touched it. Yet it shifted by the width of a single leaf. The black cat immediately lifted its head. Its golden eyes remained fixed upon the envelope. Elias noticed too. "So," he whispered, "it's beginning." Oliver looked from the envelope to the elderly woman. "What is?" She gently placed the lid back on the wooden box. Then she looked at Oliver with the same warm expression she had worn the evening he first arrived. "The longest journeys," she said quietly, "often end with the smallest letter." Outside, another star appeared above the lake. Then another. The endless sunset remained, but now the first stars were quietly weaving themselves into its golden sky, as though day and night had decided, just for this place, to meet in perfect harmony. And upon the table, the pale blue envelope rested silently, waiting for the moment when its story would finally be told. Chapter 11. When the stars came down for tea. The evening had become something Oliver had never believed possible. The sun still rested just above the distant hills, painting the lake with gentle shades of gold and rose. Yet overhead, the stars continued to appear, one by one, quietly, patiently. The sky held both sunset and starlight together, as though neither wished to interrupt the other. Oliver stepped onto the porch. The cool autumn air carried the scent of pine, warm bread, and wood smoke. Somewhere beyond the maple trees, a small brook whispered over smooth stones. He looked upward. "I've never seen anything like this." The elderly woman joined him, carrying a small tray with 2 steaming cups of tea. "Neither has anyone else." She handed him one of the cups. Tonight's tea was unlike any before. Its color resembled liquid amber touched with tiny flecks of silver that shimmered whenever the light caught them. Oliver smiled. "It looks almost like the night sky." The woman nodded. It was blended for evenings exactly like this. He took a slow sip. The flavor was delicate. Wildflower honey, pear, a hint of vanilla, and something wonderfully cool, like breathing fresh mountain air beneath countless stars. As the warmth settled within him, he noticed the first star growing brighter. Not larger, closer. He blinked. Then another followed. And another. The stars were not falling. They were drifting gently downward, slowly enough that there was no fear, only wonder. Tiny points of silver light floated toward the tea shop like glowing seeds carried upon an invisible breeze. None touched the ground. Instead, they settled among the maple branches. Some hovered above the garden. Others rested upon the lanterns lining the forgotten road. The entire valley shimmered softly. Oliver whispered, "Are they?" The elderly woman finished his sentence. "They've come for tea." He laughed quietly. "I suppose I shouldn't be surprised anymore." "No." She smiled. Wonder becomes much easier once you stop arguing with it. Inside the tea shop, Arthur stood by the window with his hat held respectfully against his chest. Amelia watched with tears quietly glistening in her eyes. Young Ethan pressed both hands against the glass, his freckles almost disappearing beneath his enormous smile. "They're beautiful." "They always are," the elderly woman replied. "Do they visit every year?" "Only once." "Why?" "They like to thank the travelers." Oliver looked toward her. "For what?" "For remembering." Without warning, one tiny silver light floated through the open doorway. It entered the tea shop so gently that not even the brass bell moved. The little light hovered above Arthur's teacup. Then, as softly as a snowflake landing upon still water, it touched the rim. For a brief moment, the painted apple blossoms decorating Arthur's cup glowed warmly. Arthur smiled. "My Margaret loved looking at the stars." He whispered the words more to himself than to anyone else. The little silver light drifted upward again before floating back outside. Next it visited Amelia's cup. The lilies painted along its side shimmered faintly. Amelia closed her eyes. "When I visit my father's garden," she said softly, "I'll stay until sunset." No one answered. The promise itself felt complete. The tiny light continued its quiet journey. It paused beside Ethan's little blue teacup. The painted birds almost seemed ready to fly. Ethan grinned. "I'm going to write to Grandpa tomorrow." The elderly woman smiled. "I think he'd like that very much." Oliver watched in quiet amazement. Each little star seemed to visit only one cup. Never two. Never the wrong one. As if every light already knew exactly where it belonged. Then, all the tiny lights became perfectly still. They gathered near the highest shelf. The midnight blue teacup. The one without a name. The room grew wonderfully silent. Even the fire seemed to burn more quietly. The silver lights circled the cup in slow, graceful movements. Once, twice, 3 times. Oliver held his breath. The stars touched the porcelain. The tiny silver stars painted upon the cup began glowing from within. Not brightly, only gently, like moonlight reflected across calm water. Then something extraordinary happened. For the very first time, steam rose from the empty cup. Soft, silver, graceful. Unlike the other cups, no memories appeared. Instead, the steam gathered into the shape of a single paper crane. It floated slowly above the shelf before unfolding into a sheet of pale blue paper. Oliver recognized it immediately. The envelope. The elderly woman nodded. "It has arrived. But it's still on the table." "It is." She smiled. "And it isn't." Oliver realized he no longer needed everything to make perfect sense. Some truths, he had discovered, were meant to be felt rather than solved. The paper hovered gently through the room. No hands carried it. No breeze guided it. It simply drifted toward the wooden table where the real pale blue envelope rested. The two touched. For one quiet heartbeat. The entire tea shop glowed with warm golden light. The fireplace. The lanterns. The teacups. The guest journals. Even the old grandfather clock seemed wrapped in gentle radiance. Then everything became peaceful once again. The paper disappeared. The envelope remained. Unopened. Exactly where it had always been. Oliver looked at Elias. "I thought." "So did I." The old postman smiled kindly. Sometimes arriving is only the beginning. Outside, hundreds of tiny silver lights now rested among the flowers in the evening garden. The blossoms seemed happier than ever. The unopened green flower Oliver had noticed days before still remained closed. Yet tonight, its petals had loosened ever so slightly. Almost ready. The elderly woman noticed Oliver looking. It won't be long now. For whom? She smiled toward the quiet hills beyond the forgotten road. For someone who is finally remembering what they wished for. The stars slowly began rising once more. One after another, they returned to the evening sky. Not hurriedly, not sadly, simply content. As the final silver light drifted upward, it paused above the tea shop. For just a moment, it shone directly through the front window. Its gentle beam rested upon Oliver's plain white teacup. The cup that still carried no painted design. No flowers. No mountains. Only his name. The little light lingered there for a heartbeat. Then it quietly joined the others among the stars. Oliver walked to the shelf. He looked closely at his cup. At first, it appeared exactly the same. Then he smiled. Barely visible beneath the warm porcelain glaze. The faint outline of a tiny maple leaf had begun to appear. The first brushstroke. The first memory. The beginning of a story that was slowly finding its way home. Behind him, the elderly woman whispered so softly that only the fire seemed to hear. Every heart becomes beautiful. One gentle evening at a time. Chapter 12. The morning the shop disappeared. At some point during the quiet evening, Oliver realized he could no longer tell how much time had passed. Perhaps it had been hours. Perhaps only a few peaceful moments. Inside the tea shop, everyone seemed content simply to be together. Arthur had begun telling Ethan gentle stories about the apple orchard he and Margaret had planted many years ago. Amelia was teaching the black cat to chase the moving shadow of a feather, though the cat appeared only mildly interested. Elias sat beside the fire, polishing the brass clasp of his old satchel while humming a melody so soft it blended with the crackling wood. The elderly woman moved quietly through the room, pouring fresh tea whenever a cup became empty, though somehow every cup was always exactly the right temperature. Oliver looked around. Nothing extraordinary was happening. No great mystery was being solved. No dramatic secret was waiting to be revealed. And yet, he had never known a place more extraordinary. Because everything here reminded people of the beauty they had almost forgotten. The beauty that had always been waiting inside ordinary days. Outside, the stars slowly faded. Not because they were disappearing, but because the eastern sky had begun to brighten. Oliver blinked. Dawn. He stepped onto the porch. For the first time since arriving, the endless sunset was gently giving way. The golden light softened into pale lavender. Then silver. The lake reflected the changing sky with quiet grace. The maple leaves stirred in the cool morning breeze. Birdsong returned to the valley. One robin. Then another. Soon the air filled with gentle music. The elderly woman joined him. It is time. Oliver looked toward her. Time for what? She smiled kindly. For everyone to continue their journey. He felt an unexpected ache. I don't think I'm ready to leave. I know. Can I stay? She looked toward the quiet road winding beneath the lanterns. If everyone stayed, who would carry the peace back into the world? Oliver lowered his eyes. He understood. The tea shop was never meant to become an escape. It was meant to become a beginning. Inside, each guest quietly prepared to leave. Arthur placed his empty teacup gently upon the counter. Until next time. The elderly woman bowed. The road remembers. Amelia folded her sketchbook beneath one arm. I think I'll go home first. The woman smiled. They've been waiting for you. I know. Ethan slipped the weathered storybook back onto the shelf. I'll tell Grandpa about this place. The elderly woman winked. He may smile more than you expect. Elias lifted his old leather satchel. Most of the letters remained inside. Only the pale blue envelope rested upon the table. Untouched. Patient. Waiting. Oliver looked at it one last time. "You still don't know who it's for?" Elias smiled. "I think I do now." Oliver waited. The old postman gently picked up the envelope. Then, without opening it, he placed it beside Oliver's plain white teacup. "I believe it has reached tomorrow." Oliver stared. "For me?" The elderly woman looked at him with warm eyes. "No. For the traveler you are becoming." Oliver hesitated. "Should I open it?" The room grew wonderfully still. The fire gave one soft crackle. Outside, a single leaf drifted past the window. The elderly woman gently shook her head. "Some letters are not meant to be read. They are meant to be carried." Oliver carefully lifted the pale blue envelope. It was surprisingly light, almost weightless. Yet somehow it felt more valuable than anything he had ever owned. He slipped it safely into the notebook he always carried. For the first time in years, his notebook held something that wasn't a destination. It held a reminder. The guests stepped outside together. Morning mist floated above the lake. The lanterns hanging from the maple trees slowly dimmed, not because they had burned out, but because daylight no longer needed them. One by one, they became simple wooden lanterns once again. Beautiful, quiet, patient, waiting for another sunset. The elderly woman stood beside the little tea shop, hands folded peacefully before her. Oliver looked back toward the garden. Every flower had closed. Even the little green blossom rested quietly once more. Only one tiny petal had opened during the night, just enough to promise that hope was still growing. He smiled. "Will I find this place again?" The woman considered the question for a long moment. "Perhaps." "How?" She looked toward the winding road beyond the bridge. "When life becomes too noisy. When you begin rushing past beautiful things. When you forget the sound of your own heart. The road may decide to remember you." Oliver laughed softly. "I'll keep looking." She smiled. "I hope you don't." He looked puzzled. "I hope you simply notice." Arthur tipped his hat before following the quiet road home. Amelia walked slowly toward the bridge, humming to herself. Ethan skipped ahead, stopping now and then to watch butterflies dance above the wildflowers. Elias lingered beside the elderly woman. "You'll keep the kettle warm?" he asked. "As always. And the lanterns, they know what to do." The old postman nodded. Then he disappeared around the bend in the forgotten road. Oliver was the last to leave. Halfway across the stone bridge, he stopped. He turned around. The tea shop still stood beside the lake. Warm smoke curled lazily from its chimney. The elderly woman waved from the porch. The black cat sat proudly beside her. The brass bell above the door shimmered in the early light. Oliver smiled and waved back. Then he continued walking. Only a dozen more steps. No more. When he looked back again, the bridge crossed an ordinary little stream. The maple trees stood quietly in the breeze. The lake was gone. The garden had vanished. The lanterns no longer hung from the branches. And the tea shop had disappeared. There was only an empty meadow where wildflowers swayed beneath the morning sun. Oliver stood there for several moments. He wasn't disappointed. Somehow, he had known this would happen. He reached into his notebook. The pale blue envelope was still there. So was a single maple leaf that had not been there before, pressed carefully between two blank pages. He smiled. Then he noticed something else. The next empty page of his notebook was no longer blank. In graceful handwriting, words had appeared. Travel slowly. Notice sunsets. Drink tea with people you love. Listen more than you speak. Leave every place a little kinder than you found it. And should the world ever become too loud, follow the quiet road home. No signature. No explanation. Only those gentle words. Oliver closed the notebook and slipped it into his bag. Years later, readers would often ask him which destination had changed his life the most. They expected him to name a famous city, a distant mountain, a hidden island. Instead, he would simply smile and answer, "There was once a little tea shop that opened only at sunset." Most people assumed it was only a story. Perhaps it was. Or perhaps, somewhere beyond an old stone bridge that no map remembers, beneath maple trees that glow in the evening light, a brass bell still rings softly whenever a weary traveler is finally ready to slow down. Maybe, even tonight, an elderly woman is placing a kettle on the stove. Maybe a black cat is stretching beside the fire. Maybe a plain white teacup is waiting patiently on a wooden shelf, ready to remember another kind heart. And if one quiet evening you catch the gentle fragrance of honey, cedar, cinnamon, and fresh tea drifting through the air where there should be none, you might pause. You might take one more step down a forgotten road. And if you are very fortunate, just as the sun kisses the horizon, you may hear the soft ring of a little brass bell welcoming you home. Until then, may your days be gentle, your evenings unhurried, and your heart always remember that the smallest moments often become the most treasured memories. And now, as the morning grows brighter and the story quietly comes to rest, you may let your own thoughts drift as peacefully as leaves upon a still lake, carrying with them only gratitude, and the comforting promise that somewhere, every sunset is waiting for someone who needs it.